Okay, so get this. We're diving into AI chatbots, but not the kind with those giant neural networks everyone's talking about.
Right.
We've got a white paper all about something called the macro language model concept.
Yeah.
Some notes on a totally different way to think about reinforcement learning.
Hmm.
And even the actual code for a chatbot called Waifu.
Interesting.
And get this, it's all built with Lisp macros.
Lisp macros.
Yeah, Lisp macros.
Wow.
It feels like we're going back to the future of AI here.
Yeah, it's definitely a different approach.
So are we going to discover that writing code by hand is actually the key to AI that can actually learn?
Well, what's really fascinating here is that these sources are all kind of pushing back against this idea that bigger is always better in AI.
Okay.
Like they're suggesting that maybe a more hands-on approach using these Lisp macros could actually have some advantages over those huge mysterious neural networks.
All right, so let's unpack this whole macro language model thing, or MLM.
MLM.
Yeah, MLM. I gotta be honest, when I saw Lisp macros, I thought I had traveled back in time.
Huh.
So what exactly are macros, and why would you use them to build an AI?
Okay, so think of a language model, like a car engine, right? It's got all these different parts that work together.
Right.
Macros are like the blueprints that tell you how to build each of those parts. They're code that actually writes other code.
Oh, wow.
And this lets you define the structure and the function of the engine in a way that's like super reusable and flexible.
So instead of training a neural network on like tons and tons of data and hoping
Yeah.
it learns how to speak,
Right.
we're basically building the language engine piece by piece,
Yeah.
like a mechanic building a custom engine.
Exactly. And that's where the benefits come in.
Okay.
Because with these MLMs, you can actually see exactly how the language model works.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you can tweak little parts without having to like rebuild the whole thing.
Right.
And you can adapt it to new situations a lot easier.
Huh.
It's like building a language model with Legos, you know? You have control over every single piece.
And this waifu chatbot is our Lego model.
Yes.
This is where we see those macros in action.
Precisely. Waifu uses macros to define everything from keywords to responses, even how it remembers things and expresses its personality.
Well, hold on, personality.
Yeah.
So you're saying this chatbot has feelings now?
Well, not feelings exactly like in the human sense,
Okay.
but it is programmed with different personality types,
Okay.
like those dare archetypes you see in anime.
Okay.
So, for instance, the Sunder personality starts off cold, but then kind of warms up over time.
Right.
And waifu can actually switch between these different personality types, which makes the conversation a lot less predictable.
So if I'm chatting with waifu and it goes from like super friendly to all frosty,
Yes.
that's its programmed personality acting up.
Exactly.
I'm picturing a chatbot with mood swings.
Uh-huh. That's a good way to put it.
So the interesting part is that these personalities shifts its memory, its interests, even its affection level are all controlled by these Lisp macros.
That's right.
You can change the code to make it more or less Sunder, or even create a completely new personality type.
Exactly. It's incredibly flexible.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. But how does reinforcement learning fit into all of this?
Right.
Your notes mentioned doing it without neural networks, which seems a bit odd.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
We can actually use reinforcement learning, or RL for short, to help these macros adapt and learn over time, just like a neural network would, but without all the mystery of what's happening inside.
Okay.
Imagine those macros actually evolving and getting better at understanding you and responding to you.
So the macros are learning by trial and error and getting rewarded when they do something right,
That's the idea. You give it a treat when it does what you want and it learns to do it again.
like training a dog.
Exactly. With MLMs, those treats are actually rewards based on how well the macros perform. So if a macro creates a good response, it gets a positive reward. If it makes a mistake, it's a negative reward. And over time, the macros learn to favor the actions that lead to those positive rewards.
Gotcha. But how do you actually implement reinforcement learning without those neural networks doing the heavy lifting?
Well, we can use simpler algorithms like Q learning. Think of it like this. You want to find the best restaurants in a new city. You try different places. Some are great, some not so much.
Right.
You start to build a mental map of which places to visit and which to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, Q learning does something similar. It keeps track of which actions lead to the best rewards in different situations.
So instead of a supercomputer crunching numbers, we have an algorithm that's building a best of list for the chatbot.
You got it.
But that's got to have some limitations, right?
Of course, this method might struggle with extremely complex situations,
Right.
but the upside is incredible transparency. We can actually see how the system is making decisions.
Huh.
Unlike neural networks, where the learning process is kind of a black box, here we know what's going on every step of the way.
I can definitely see how that would be perfect for chatbots, where understanding how decisions are made is super important.
Absolutely.
But wouldn't building everything with macros be incredibly time-consuming?
It's true that the initial design phase can be more intensive.
Okay.
However, the potential benefits in terms of transparency control and customizability can outweigh that upfront investment.
All right, you've convinced me this whole idea of code writing macros, building a transparent language model, and then having reinforcement learning help them adapt is pretty mind-blowing.
It's a powerful concept.
Now, I'm dying to know how all of this works in practice. Let's dive into this waifu chatbot and see how these concepts come to life.
This is where things get fun.
Okay.
The waifu chatbot, while playful, gives us some real insight into how these concepts actually work.
Okay.
It shows how macros can define not just the chatbot's language skills, but also its personality, its memory, and even its ability to learn.
So let's start with the personality you mentioned, dare types.
Yeah.
How do those work in practice? Does the chatbot like have a split personality or something?
It's a little more nuanced than that. Waifu has an internal affection level that determines which personality type is dominant at any given moment.
Okay.
And certain things you say can increase or decrease this affection, leading to real-time personality shifts.
So if I'm like super nice to waifu, its affection level goes up and it becomes sweeter.
Right.
But if I'm a jerk, its affection drops and it becomes like cold and distant like a real person.
Exactly. It's a simplified model of human interaction, but it effectively demonstrates how macros can create dynamic and engaging personalities.
That's pretty wild, but personality is just one piece of the puzzle. What about memory? Can this chatbot actually remember things I've said, like an actual person?
Well, while not as complex as a human memory, Waifu does have a system for storing and retrieving information.
Oh, interesting.
It uses what's called a waifu frame, which basically acts like a memory bank holding information about the conversation and the chatbot's internal state.
So it's not just responding to each thing I say in isolation. It's actually building up a context for our conversation, remembering things I've said before.
Precisely. For instance, it can remember your feelings goals, even things you've shared about your childhood.
Wow.
And this isn't just passive storage. It actively uses this information to tailor its responses, making the conversation feel much more personalized and relevant to you.
This is really cool. So we have personality, we have memory, and we know that it's all built on those transparent, customizable macros.
Yeah.
What about learning? You mentioned earlier that reinforcement learning could make those macros adapt and evolve. How would that work with waifu?
So imagine giving Waifu feedback on its responses, like you might do with a language learning app.
Boy.
If you tell it a response was helpful, the reinforcement learning algorithms could use that feedback to strengthen the macro that generated it.
So instead of me tweaking the code to make waifu more to my liking, I could actually train it through conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Like a pet.
That's a good analogy. And the more you interact with it, the more personalized its responses would become. It would learn your preferences and communication style, something that traditional AI models really struggle with.
I have to admit, I'm officially on board with this vision of AI. We've got transparency, customizability, personality, and even the potential for learning.
It's a world away from those giant, inscrutable neural networks.
It's a different approach for sure.
But I'm still a little skeptical. How did these concepts scale to more complex language models? Can a macro language model really compete with the big players in the AI world?
That's a great question, and it's the million-dollar question. Can we take this macro magic and make it work on a larger scale?
Because as fun as it is to chat with a personality-shifting anime chatbot, it's not exactly writing novels or translating languages like those big AI models are doing.
Right.
So how do we go from waifu to a true macro language model that can play in the big leagues?
That's what we'll uncover next.
Yeah.
Scaling up this whole macro magic thing is definitely the challenge.
I mean, think about it. Those big language models everyone's always talking about, they have billions, even trillions of parameters.
Right.
To match that kind of scale using macros, it would be like a massive undertaking just to design and manage all that code.
So it's not just about writing more macros.
No.
It's about making sure that they can handle that crazy level of complexity without becoming a tangled mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to think about how to organize those macros, how to make them work together efficiently, and how to manage a truly enormous amount of code.
Right.
It's a challenge for software engineering as much as it is for AI.
That sounds like a pretty tall order. But let's say we crack the code on scalability.
Okay.
There's still the issue of learning. You mentioned how reinforcement learning could help those macros adapt,
Right.
but can it really compete with the learning power of those data-hungry neural networks?
Mm.
I mean, aren't we sacrificing some learning power by avoiding them altogether?
That's where choosing the right learning algorithms is really crucial. So while Waifu relies on pre-programmed logic, a true MLM would actually need to learn from data,
Yeah.
whether it's text or code or even interactions with users.
Okay.
It's not about avoiding neural networks entirely, it's about finding the right balance.
So how do we teach these macros to learn? Do we need to like invent a whole new set of learning algorithms?
We could, specifically for this macro-based system, or we could also explore how existing machine learning techniques, even neural networks themselves,
Wow.
could be integrated into this MLM framework.
Interesting.
It's about using the best tool for the job.
So we could have neural networks handling some of the lower level tasks while those macros are taking care of like the higher level thinking and decision making.
Exactly, a kind of hybrid approach.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful concept that kind of breaks down those traditional walls between these two approaches to AI.
Huh.
Imagine combining the adaptability of neural networks with that clarity and control of macros.
It makes those giant language models seem like a bit of a black box, right?
Yeah.
We feed them data, they give us impressive results,
Right.
but we often don't really know how they're actually doing it.
Right.
Always makes me a little uneasy, to be honest.
I get that, and that's actually one of the strongest arguments in favor of this macro-based approach.
Yeah.
Because with MLMs, everything is out in the open.
Mm.
The logic of the model is encoded in those human-readable macros. So
Yeah.
we can actually trace every step of the decision-making process. We can understand why the model is behaving in a certain way.
Okay.
And we can even fix errors in a way that's just not possible with those neural networks.
It's like having a language model with an open source code base.
Exactly.
We can see how it's built. We can understand how it works. We can even contribute to its development.
Right.
That kind of transparency could be revolutionary.
Absolutely. Transparency is key to building trust in AI,
Yeah.
making sure it's accountable, and addressing any concerns about bias.
Right.
If we can build AI that is both powerful and understandable, we open up a whole world of possibilities while also managing the risks.
I'm starting to see how this could really change the game. But let's come back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
We've got these scalability challenges. We need to figure out how to integrate learning.
Right.
And then there's the question of actually building these MLMs.
Yeah,
It just sounds like a monumental task.
it is.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this is a long-term research project.
Okay.
It's not about replacing neural networks overnight.
Right.
It's about exploring new approaches that could lead to a more balanced and ultimately beneficial AI landscape.
So it's about laying the foundation for like a new era of AI.
Exactly.
One that's built on transparency, customizability, and maybe even a bit of that old school craftsmanship we saw in the Waifu chatbot.
Exactly. And it starts with bringing together researchers, developers, and enthusiasts who are excited about this vision and willing to collaborate.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The Waifu chatbot started as someone's passion project.
Right.
It shows you what's possible when you combine creativity with a willingness to experiment.
Yeah.
Who knows, the next big breakthrough in AI could come from a similar spark of inspiration.
That's what's so exciting about this field, right?
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving, driven by this shared desire to understand intelligence
Right.
and create machines that can actually enhance our own abilities.
It's a challenging path, but the potential rewards are immense.
Yeah, it's a journey of understanding not just technology, but ourselves, our values and our aspirations.
Well said.
So we've gone from a quirky chatbot to a vision of AI that's transparent, understandable, and maybe even a bit more human.
It's been quite a journey.
But there's one thing we haven't talked about, how these MLMs actually interact with the real world.
Right.
It's one thing to process language. It's another to actually use that language to do things to solve problems to make a difference.
You're right.
That's where it gets really interesting.
You're right. The real power of language is in its ability to shape our thoughts, our actions, and our world. And as we explore the potential of these MLMs to understand and generate language in a way that's both powerful and transparent,
Yeah.
we naturally start to think about how these models can go beyond simply processing information
Okay.
and actually act upon it. That's the frontier we'll explore next.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the big question.
Yeah.
How do we take these macro language models with all their transparency and customizability
Right.
and actually set them loose in the real world?
Yeah.
It's one thing to build a chat bot that can, chat.
Right.
But how do we actually get to an AI that can do things, make things happen?
That's where we get into this idea of actionable language, you know? It's not enough for an AI to just understand and generate words.
Right.
It needs to be able to translate those words into actions that have real impact.
Okay, so give me an example. How
Okay.
would an MLM go from like processing words to actually taking action?
Okay, so imagine a personal assistant
Hmm.
that's powered by an MLM.
Okay.
You tell it, schedule a meeting with Sarah for next Tuesday at 2 p.m.
This AI wouldn't just understand the words.
Yeah.
It would understand your intent.
Oh, wow.
It would check your calendar,
Yeah.
see if Sarah's free send-out, invites, even book a meeting room,
Wow.
all through a natural language conversation.
So it's kind of like those voice assistants we have now, like Siri or Alexa,
Right.
but on a whole other level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Way more understanding, way more flexibility, able to handle much more complex tasks.
And because we're talking about MLMs that are built on those transparent, customizable macros,
Yes.
you have a level of control you just don't get with current AI.
Exactly.
You could actually see how the AI is interpreting your requests, make adjustments if needed, even teach it new skills
Well, yeah.
just by like adding or changing those macros.
Exactly. It's incredibly powerful.
Okay, I'm seeing the possibilities here.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. We're talking about AI understanding our intentions, taking
Yeah.
action, interacting with the real world.
Right.
Doesn't that open up a whole can of worms, ethically speaking?
It does. What happens when these systems start making decisions that actually affect our lives?
Yeah, you've hit on a really critical point. The more we empower AI to act, the more careful we have to be.
Right.
And that's where that transparency of MLMs is so valuable.
Okay.
We need to be able to understand how these systems are making decisions,
Yeah.
what values are baked into their code,
Hmm.
and how to make sure that they're aligned with our own ethics.
Because, it's one thing if my AI misunderstands my music request.
Right.
It's another thing entirely if it's controlling my car or managing my finances.
Exactly. The stakes are much higher.
Yeah.
And that's why those macros being transparent and customizable is so important.
Right.
It gives us the tools to actually examine that decision-making process, to spot potential biases,
Okay.
and to ensure that these AI systems are acting in a way that's safe, fair, and beneficial.
It sounds like building these MLMs is as much about philosophy and ethics
It is.
as it is about computer science.
Absolutely.
It's not just about what they can do, but what they should do.
Right.
What values we actually want to build into them and how we make sure that they stay under human control.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
We're not just building machines, we're shaping the future of intelligence itself, both artificial and our own.
Wow.
And that requires a deep understanding, not just of technology, but of ourselves, our values, and what kind of world we want to create.
Wow. That's a lot to consider.
It is.
But I have to say, I'm also feeling a sense of hope.
Yeah.
If we can actually get this right, if we can build AI that's powerful and aligned with our values,
Right.
the possibilities are incredible.
They are.
We could have AI helping us tackle huge problems, climate change, disease, poverty.
And not just solve problems, but unlock creativity and innovation that we can't even imagine yet.
Yeah.
AI collaborating with artists, musicians, writers, pushing the boundaries of human expression. AI helping us explore the universe, discover new knowledge, expand our understanding of ourselves and the cosmos.
Now you're getting me thinking science fiction.
Uh-huh.
But that's the thing about AI, right? It just constantly pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Absolutely.
And these macro language models, with their transparency and potential, offer a path toward an AI future that's both exciting and empowering.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It had.
We've gone from this quirky anime chatbot to this vision of AI that could reshape the world.
Yeah.
It won't be easy, but the potential rewards are too great to ignore.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. We went from the delightful weirdness of the waifu chatbot
Right.
to the potential of macro language models really changing the game in AI.
It's fascinating stuff.
This whole approach, with its focus on making AI understandable, is like a breath of fresh air.
I agree.
It's a call to rethink what's possible, to build AI that's not just intelligent, but also reflects our values.
Well said.
And that's a future worth exploring.